From censored naked opening scenes to Nazi stormtroopers introducing commercial breaks, The Richard Pryor Show packed more controversy into 4 episodes than most series achieve in entire seasons. This groundbreaking 1977 variety show featured Star Wars aliens, Maya Angelou's dramatic monologues, and one of the most bizarre battles between a comedian and network censors in television history, all before vanishing after less than a month on air. Fact 1. The banned Ken doll opening. When The Richard Pryor Show premiered on September 13, 1977, viewers saw a Star Wars-themed sketch to open the episode, but that wasn't what Richard Pryor had originally planned. The comedian had filmed a drastically different opening scene that NBC executives pulled at the last minute, and it remains one of the most audacious statements about network censorship ever attempted on primetime television. In the banned opening, Pryor appeared on screen in what seemed to be a simple, straightforward introduction to his new variety show. He stood in front of the camera and spoke directly to concerns that NBC would force him to tone down his famously edgy comedy style for network television. Looking straight at the audience, Pryor declared, "I'm standing here naked. I've given up absolutely nothing," assuring viewers that he hadn't compromised his artistic vision to secure the show. Then, in a moment designed to shock and satirize simultaneously, the camera slowly pulled back to reveal that Pryor was indeed standing completely nude, but with his genitalia digitally erased, leaving him smooth and featureless like a Ken doll. The visual joke was devastatingly clear. Pryor was saying he hadn't given anything up while literally showing that NBC had neutered him. When producer Rocco Urbisci informed Pryor that NBC had ordered the opening deleted and replaced with the safer Star Wars Cantina sketch, the comedian's reaction was explosive. According to those present, there was what one crew member described as a storm, and Pryor actually quit the show in protest. Network executives eventually convinced him to return, but only after he negotiated to reduce his commitment from 10 episodes down to just 4. The banned opening scene was later included on the 2004 DVD release as a menu screen, finally allowing audiences to see what Pryor had envisioned and what NBC deemed too controversial for 1970s prime time. Fact 2. Only 4 episodes ever aired. The Richard Pryor Show holds the unfortunate distinction of being one of the shortest-lived series in network television history, airing exactly 4 episodes over the span of just 5 weeks before disappearing from NBC's schedule forever. The show debuted on Tuesday, September 13, 1977, and its final episode aired on October 20th of that same year, giving Pryor's groundbreaking variety series less than 6 weeks on the air before it vanished completely. What makes this brief run even more remarkable is that NBC had originally contracted Richard Pryor to produce 10 full episodes of the series, meaning the show didn't even make it halfway through its planned first season. The dramatic reduction from 10 episodes to 4 came directly from Pryor himself, who became so frustrated with the network's constant censorship battles and creative interference that he renegotiated his contract to cut his commitment in half. Pryor later addressed the circumstances surrounding the show's early end in a stand-up routine included on the DVD release, telling audiences in his characteristically blunt style that the network didn't cancel him, and that he had only agreed to do 4 shows before getting himself out of there. The compressed timeline meant that The Richard Pryor Show never had the opportunity to find its audience or develop the kind of rhythm that most successful variety shows need to thrive. The series ranked 86th out of 104 shows for the 1977 to 1978 television season with an average rating of 14.5. And without any reruns airing during its original run, the show simply came and went in what felt like an instant. For years afterward, the episodes were extremely difficult to find, becoming something of a legend among comedy fans who had heard about the show's controversial content but couldn't actually watch it until the DVD release in 2004 finally made all 4 episodes available again. Fact 3. Scheduled against TV's biggest hits. NBC made what many considered a baffling programming decision when they scheduled The Richard Pryor Show to air at 8 p.m. on Tuesday nights, placing it in direct competition with the 2 most popular shows on American television at that time. Over on ABC, the 8 o'clock Tuesday time slot was home to Happy Days and Laverne and Shirley, both of which dominated the ratings and represented everything wholesome and family-friendly about 1970s sitcom television, making them the absolute worst possible competition for Pryor's edgy, controversial variety show. The scheduling choice was even more puzzling because 8 p.m. fell squarely within what was known as the Family Hour, a time slot where networks were expected to air programming suitable for viewers of all ages. Industry observers and critics openly questioned why NBC would place one of America's most controversial and profanity-laced comedians directly in the middle of Family Hour, especially when the network could have given the show a better chance of success by scheduling it later in the evening at 9 or 10 p.m., when adult-oriented programming was more acceptable and expected. Richard Pryor himself recognized the problem immediately and held a press conference the day before his show premiered, angrily pointing out that NBC had scheduled his program at 8 o'clock purely for financial reasons rather than giving it a time slot where it might actually succeed. Pryor wasn't wrong to be frustrated, as the numbers proved his point decisively. The Richard Pryor Show consistently finished third in its time slot, losing not just to Happy Days, but sometimes even to local baseball games that aired in various markets. The New York Times acknowledged the scheduling disaster in their review, writing that if there were problems with the show's content, the time slot should be changed, but Richard Pryor should definitely stay on the air, recognizing that NBC had essentially set him up to fail from the very beginning. Fact 4. Growing Pains. Dad wrote for it. It. Long before Alan Thicke became known to millions of Americans as Jason Seaver, the wholesome psychiatrist father on the hit sitcom Growing Pains, he was working behind the scenes as one of the writers on The Richard Pryor Show, helping to craft some of the most controversial comedy that had ever appeared on network television. Thicke, who was just establishing himself in Hollywood at the time, served as head writer for both the Richard Pryor special that aired in May of 1977 and the subsequent series that followed later that year. What made Thicke's role particularly unique was the unconventional way he had to work with Richard Pryor to capture the comedian's brilliant but unpredictable comedic voice. In a later interview, Thicke explained that his primary skill on the show involved knowing how to push Pryor's creative buttons and then immediately hitting record on his cassette player to capture whatever comedic gold came flowing out of Pryor's mouth in response. Thicke described the process as improvisational collaboration, where he would present Pryor with a premise or idea and wait to see if it made the comedian's eyes light up with inspiration. And if it did, Thicke would frantically transcribe the gems that Pryor improvised on the spot. The experience of writing edgy, boundary-pushing material for Richard Pryor stood in stark contrast to the family-friendly sitcom work that would later define Thicke's career, including composing theme songs for shows like Different Strokes and The Facts of Life, alongside his then-wife Gloria Loring. Thicke even joked in interviews that while he could write provocative and controversial material for other performers like Pryor and Sam Kinison to deliver, he never had the courage to say those kinds of things himself, preferring to let bolder comedians take the risks while he worked safely behind the scenes. Fact 5. Star Wars gave official approval. One of the most memorable sketches from The Richard Pryor Show featured the comedian working as a bartender in the famous cantina from Star Wars, and surprisingly, this parody wasn't some low-budget recreation, but actually used the real costumes and alien creatures directly from the original 1977 film. Lucasfilm didn't just tolerate this unauthorized use of their characters. They actively provided the materials and gave their full blessing for the sketch to happen as part of a deliberate marketing strategy. The man behind this unusual collaboration was Charles Lippincott, who served as the publicist for Star Wars: A New Hope and was actively looking for creative ways to keep the film in front of television audiences after its theatrical release. Lippincott later explained on social media that he made a conscious decision to reach different audiences with different vehicles. And The Richard Pryor Show was specifically chosen because it was edgier than Saturday Night Live and could help Star Wars reach both the SNL demographic and multicultural audiences who might not have been targeted by traditional marketing. The sketch featured nearly all of the alien characters from the movie's cantina scene, including Greedo, Hammerhead, and several other creatures, all wearing their authentic costumes from the film's wardrobe department. This Star Wars cantina sketch was just one piece of a larger television marketing campaign that Lippincott orchestrated to promote the film on the small screen. The same strategy that brought Star Wars to the Richard Pryor Show also led to appearances on Donnie and Marie, and most infamously, resulted in the Star Wars Holiday Special that aired on CBS in 1978. Lippincott's approach meant that Richard Pryor's comedy sketch exists as a strange companion piece to the holiday special, both serving as bizarre but officially sanctioned attempts to expand the Star Wars universe onto television screens across America. Fact 6. Rick Baker created space aliens. The elaborate alien creatures that appeared in the Richard Pryor Show's Star Wars Cantina sketch weren't just borrowed costumes from the movie, but were actually designed and created by Rick Baker, a special effects makeup artist who would go on to become one of the most decorated artists in Hollywood history. Baker, who had worked on the original Star Wars film as part of the creature design team, brought his considerable talents to the television sketch and created a menagerie of space creatures for Richard Pryor to interact with as the cantina's grumpy bartender. What makes Baker's involvement even more impressive is understanding just how accomplished he would become in the years following the Richard Pryor Show. Baker went on to win the Academy Award for Best Makeup 7 times out of 11 nominations, starting with the inaugural award for An American Werewolf in London in 1981 and continuing with wins for films like Harry and the Hendersons, Ed Wood, The Nutty Professor, Men in Black, and How the Grinch Stole Christmas. His work on Michael Jackson's Thriller music video in 1983 helped make the phrase Rick Baker, Monster Maker a household name among fans of special effects and creature design. Among the various aliens Baker created for the Pryor sketch, one particular creature stands out for being surprisingly provocative. The sketch featured what observers described as a giant phallic-shaped alien that somehow managed to slip past NBC's notoriously strict censors, who were apparently so overwhelmed dealing with all the other controversial content in the show that they didn't notice or didn't object to this particularly suggestive creature design. The fact that the censors caught this detail speaks to just how much provocative material Pryor and his team were trying to sneak into the show, effectively using some controversies as distractions while other questionable content made it through to the final broadcast. Fact 7. John Belushi played a slave ship captain. Before the Richard Pryor Show became a weekly series, it started as a one-time television special called The Richard Pryor Special that aired on NBC in May of 1977. And this special opened with one of the most daring and confrontational sketches ever broadcast on network television. The cold open featured Richard Pryor as one of dozens of shirtless black men trapped on a slave ship, being whipped and brutalized by the ship's captain, who was played by none other than Saturday Night Live star John Belushi, wielding a whip and barking orders at the enslaved men below deck. The sketch took an unexpected turn when Pryor's character was singled out from among all the other enslaved men, not for freedom or mercy, but for what the sketch presented as an even worse punishment than slavery itself. The punchline revealed that Pryor had been selected to work for NBC, the network that was airing the special, turning the entire opening into a darkly satirical commentary on how Pryor viewed his relationship with the network and the restrictions they would place on his creative freedom. The joke suggested that working for NBC and dealing with their censorship and demands would be as oppressive and dehumanizing as the horrors depicted in the sketch. This wasn't Belushi's only appearance in the Richard Pryor special, as he also showed up later in a bar sketch where he played a bat-wielding bartender opposite Pryor's character, who portrayed a boastful drunk. The special was controversial enough and successful enough in its ratings that it convinced NBC executives to offer Pryor a full series, though the network apparently didn't fully grasp that the slave ship sketch was a warning about exactly the kind of battles over creative control that would ultimately doom the series after just 4 episodes. Fact 8. Maya Angelou performed original dramatic poetry. One of the most surprising and powerful moments in the Richard Pryor special featured Maya Angelou, the celebrated poet and civil rights activist who was already famous for her autobiography I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings, appearing in a sketch that completely defied the expectations of what a comedy variety show should be. The segment began as a typical comedic bar scene, with Richard Pryor playing a loud, boastful drunk who gets beaten up by fellow bar patrons before staggering home across the street to his apartment. But once Pryor's character arrived home and passed out, the sketch took an unexpected and serious turn. Maya Angelou appeared as Pryor's long-suffering wife, and rather than continuing the comedy, she delivered an emotional and poetically powerful monologue that she had written specifically for the special. Her performance transformed the entire sketch from knockabout comedy into what observers described as a tragic love story, with Angelou's character explaining the pain of watching a good man who had been broken by his experiences with racism and injustice in America slowly destroy himself and their relationship through alcohol. The monologue was performed with the same lyrical virtuosity and emotional depth that made Angelou one of the most respected writers in the country, and it represented a kind of disarmingly artful, pure poetry that had never been seen on primetime television before and hasn't really been seen since. What made the moment even more remarkable was that it appeared without explanation or context in the middle of a comedy special, challenging viewers who had tuned in expecting nothing but laughs from Richard Pryor. Maya Angelou was so proud of her collaboration with Pryor and his creative team that she took out an advertisement in Variety magazine specifically to thank them for the opportunity to be part of the special. Fact 9. A Nazi stormtrooper introduced commercials. Among the many shocking and controversial elements that appeared in the Richard Pryor Show, one particularly bizarre moment somehow managed to slip past NBC's notoriously strict censors without anyone raising an objection or demanding it be cut. During one of the episodes, a commercial break was introduced by a performer dressed in a Nazi stormtrooper uniform who gave what was described as a Sieg Heil salute before the show cut away to advertisements, a moment that would almost certainly never make it onto network television today, regardless of the context or satirical intent. The fact that this Nazi imagery made it onto primetime television becomes even more remarkable when you consider just how vigilant NBC's Standards and Practices Department was being about every other aspect of the Richard Pryor Show. The network's censors were constantly battling with Pryor and his production team over content, cutting sketches, demanding rewrites, and ultimately pulling the entire opening sequence of the first episode because they found it too controversial. The censors were so involved and so aggressive in their oversight that it led directly to Pryor quitting the show after only 4 episodes, because he couldn't tolerate the constant interference with his creative vision. The prevailing theory about how the Nazi stormtrooper moment survived is that Richard Pryor and his team had overwhelmed the censors with so much other provocative material that they were essentially using some controversies as distractions while sneaking other questionable content through to the final broadcast. According to those who worked on the show, the censors were described as combat fatigued from dealing with all the other battles over content, and in their exhausted state, they apparently either didn't notice the stormtrooper or were too tired to fight about one more thing after dealing with everything else Pryor was throwing at them. Fact 10. Robin Williams got his break. Here, before Robin Williams became a household name as the alien Mork from Ork on the hit sitcom Mork and Mindy, he was a relatively unknown comedian working as a cast member on The Richard Pryor Show, appearing in multiple sketches across the show's 4 episodes. Williams was part of what would later be recognized as an incredibly stacked supporting cast that included several performers who went on to have major careers in Hollywood. But at the time, they were all just hungry young comedians trying to make their mark in the industry. Williams appeared in several notable sketches during the show's brief run, including one of the most famous segments where Richard Pryor portrayed the first black president of the United States holding a chaotic press conference. In that sketch, Williams played one of the reporters questioning the president alongside Sandra Bernhard and Marsha Warfield, both of whom were also early in their careers and would later find significant success in television and film. The fourth and final episode of the series featured an extended roast segment where cast members who had been underutilized in previous episodes, including Williams, Bernhard, John Witherspoon, and Warfield, were each given several minutes to perform harder-hitting material at Richard Pryor's expense. According to multiple sources who reviewed the series years later, Williams shot to incredible fame after his time on The Richard Pryor Show, with his role as Mork launching him into superstardom and leading to a legendary career in both comedy and dramatic films. The show served as an important stepping stone for Williams and several other cast members, giving them national exposure on network television and the chance to work alongside one of the most influential comedians of the 20th century during a pivotal moment in television comedy history. Fact 11. Replaced by an even shorter-lived show. After The Richard Pryor Show aired its final episode on October 4, 1977, NBC executives moved quickly to fill the now vacant Tuesday night time slot with a replacement series, demonstrating that they had learned absolutely nothing from the failure of Pryor's show. The network chose to program a family-friendly sitcom called Grandpa Goes to Washington, which represented the complete opposite approach from the edgy, controversial comedy that had just been canceled. But the new show turned out to be an even bigger disaster than the one it replaced. Grandpa Goes to Washington lasted only 6 episodes before NBC pulled the plug, meaning that the safe, wholesome show that was supposed to fix the time slot's ratings problems actually had a shorter run than the Richard Pryor Show's already remarkably brief 4-episode tenure. The irony of this situation wasn't lost on observers, as NBC had essentially gambled that removing Pryor's challenging and boundary-pushing comedy in favor of something more conventional and family-oriented would solve their Tuesday night problems, only to discover that audiences weren't interested in what the network was offering, regardless of how safe or controversial it might be. The back-to-back failures highlighted just how difficult the Tuesday night 8 p.m. time slot had become for NBC, with the network unable to find any programming that could successfully compete against ABC's dominant lineup of Happy Days and Laverne and Shirley. While The Richard Pryor Show at least had the excuse of being scheduled against the 2 highest-rated shows on television and being forced to air during Family Hour. Despite its adult-oriented content, Grandpa Goes to Washington had no such justification for its failure, as it was exactly the kind of programming that should have theoretically thrived in that time slot and still couldn't find an audience. Fact 12. Duel. Pryor portrayed America's first black president. One of the most famous and enduring sketches from The Richard Pryor Show featured the comedian portraying the 40th President of the United States, who also happened to be the first African American to hold that office, in a scenario that wouldn't become reality for another 3 decades. The sketch, which aired in 1977, showed President Pryor holding a wide-ranging press conference that quickly descended into chaos as reporters asked increasingly provocative questions, and the president responded with blunt, politically charged answers that reflected Pryor's signature comedic style. The press conference sketch was groundbreaking because it imagined a black president not as some distant fantasy, but as a real person dealing with the actual tensions and contradictions of race in America, with the scenario becoming both hilarious and uncomfortable as it progressed. According to descriptions of the sketch, President Pryor started out calm and composed while answering questions from the assembled reporters. But when a reporter from Jet magazine asked if he would nominate Black Panther leader Huey Newton as FBI director, the president's demeanor shifted dramatically from calm to militant in an instant. The sketch further escalated when another reporter insulted the president's mother, leading to a physical altercation, and President Pryor jokingly revealed his plans to have white mistresses in the White House. The sketch became one of the most talked-about moments from the series and has been widely cited as prophetic, given that Barack Obama was elected as America's first black president in 2008, more than 30 years after Pryor performed the bit. Comedy historians and fans have pointed to this sketch as an example of how Pryor's comedy was simultaneously entertaining and politically daring, using humor to explore serious questions about race and power in America. Fact 13. The show ranked 86th out of 104. When the final ratings for the 1977 to 1978 television season were tallied, The Richard Pryor Show finished in 86th place out of 104 programs that aired on the major networks, a dismal showing that reflected just how poorly the series had performed with mainstream audiences. The show averaged a 14.5 rating during its brief run, which meant that only about 14.5% of households with televisions were tuning in to watch Pryor's groundbreaking but controversial variety show. These disappointing numbers tell only part of the story. However, because the show's poor ratings performance needs to be understood in the context of the impossible situation that NBC had created by scheduling it at 8 p.m. on Tuesday nights. The series was competing directly against the two most popular shows on American television at that time, Happy Days and Laverne and Shirley, which consistently dominated their time slot and made it nearly impossible for any competing program to find an audience. Adding to the difficulty was the fact that the 8 p.m. hour fell within the family hour programming block, meaning that The Richard Pryor Show was trying to attract viewers with edgy, adult-oriented comedy during a time when families were specifically looking for wholesome entertainment they could watch together. The show's ranking near the bottom of all network programs might suggest that it was a complete failure, but many television critics and industry observers at the time argued that the real failure belonged to NBC for mishandling the series so badly. The network had taken one of the most talented and popular comedians in America and set him up to fail by giving him an impossible time slot, censoring his material to the point where he quit in frustration, and then blaming him when the ratings came in low. Fact 14. TV Guide called it canceled too soon. More than 3 decades after The Richard Pryor Show vanished from television after just 4 episodes, TV Guide magazine officially recognized that the series had been prematurely canceled when they included it in their 2013 list of 60 shows that were canceled too soon. This recognition represented a significant vindication for Richard Pryor and his creative vision, acknowledging that the show's failure in 1977 had less to do with the quality of the content and more to do with NBC's mishandling of the series and the cultural climate of the time, not being ready for what Pryor was trying to accomplish. The TV Guide designation highlighted how The Richard Pryor Show's influence extended far beyond its brief original run, with the publication recognizing that the series had served as a crucial precursor to later groundbreaking sketch comedy programs that pushed boundaries and challenged social norms. Shows like In Living Color, which launched on Fox in 1990 and featured a predominantly black cast performing edgy, socially conscious comedy sketches, owed a clear debt to what Pryor had attempted more than a decade earlier. Similarly, Chappelle's Show, which premiered on Comedy Central in 2003 and became famous for its provocative racial humor and willingness to tackle controversial subjects, followed directly in the tradition that Pryor had established with his 1970s variety show. The inclusion on TV Guide's list represented a broader critical reassessment of The Richard Pryor Show that had been building for years, with comedy historians and television critics increasingly recognizing that the series was ahead of its time in its blend of comedy and drama, its extended sketch format, its politically charged content, and its commitment to showcasing black performers and perspectives on network television, when such representation was extremely rare. Fact 15. Pryor quit during his wedding week. According to Jennifer Lee Pryor, who would eventually become Richard Pryor's widow after marrying him twice over the course of their complicated relationship, the comedian experienced one of the most chaotic and eventful weeks of his life in 1977, when everything seemed to happen at once. Jennifer, who was working as an assistant to the decorator renovating Pryor's house at the time, recalled that during the same week that Richard quit The Richard Pryor Show in frustration over NBC's censorship and creative interference, he also married his girlfriend, Deborah McGuire, and told a crowd at a Hollywood Bowl benefit concert to kiss his black behind, creating a perfect storm of personal and professional drama. Jennifer Lee Pryor described watching Richard leave for work each morning during the show's production, looking conservative and nicely dressed, only to return home at the end of the day completely undone and emotionally exhausted because the network executives were interfering with his creative vision so aggressively. She observed that NBC was essentially tormenting him too much with their constant demands for changes and their refusal to let him do the kind of comedy that had made him famous in the first place, and the stress of these battles was clearly taking a severe toll on the comedian. The fact that Pryor managed to quit his network television show, get married, and publicly tell off an audience all within the span of 7 days speaks volumes about both his volatile personality and the intense pressure he was under during this period of his life. Richard Pryor was described by those who knew him as someone who was busy and unpredictable, prone to making major life decisions impulsively, and the events of that week in 1977 perfectly captured the chaos that often surrounded him.